make sure. Okay, we're good. And there's a microphone there.
Where?
It's on. There. Oh, you've got it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just let me know.
Yeah. You can go ahead.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. My name is Ann Schwartzman. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Prison Society. We do have some information upstairs, but just to give a very quick update, in case you're not familiar with us, we're a statewide organization. We believe and push for humanity and justice in the prisons with those incarcerated and their families. And we were established in 1789. We actually have the distinct privilege of being yet another group founded by Ben Franklin. He was very, very active in the day, and he basically put together everything that you can think of: eyeglasses, hospitals, libraries, and the Prison Society, back then known as the Philadelphia Society for the Alleviation of Miseries of Public Prisons. It is a big name, a very good name, very descriptive, but it takes too long to say. So when we became statewide, we changed it to the Pennsylvania Prison Society. But I'm mentioning the history because of one very profound example I wanted to give you of how this work continues and how prisons just keep moving on. Back in the day, we had a founding of over 200 individuals in the Walnut Street Jail, one of the first jails in the new Philadelphia area. It really set the tide for what was to come. But back in those days, our volunteers made it a point to provide food, because not everybody would get food in the jails then, and also clothing, because you usually had what you had on your back and that was it, regardless of the weather, regardless of the conditions. John Hargraves and I took a trip about a year ago to the State Correctional Facility at Pittsburgh. One of the discussions we overheard was the superintendent speaking with several volunteers and talking about the need for donated coats for people who were being released in February and standing on the bus corner. That's over 200 and nearly 30 years ago. And frankly, we're talking about the same things. We're talking about conditions, we're talking about basic people's needs. Prisons are not new. Prisons just keep going on with the same questions we had back in the day. Are they for punishment? Are they deterrence? Are they rehabilitation? Just really, what are they for? If you fast forward some 200 years, we have created a monster that's based on policies, it's based on politics, it's based on our communities, all in the name of doing better and keeping us safe. But I'm not so sure it's really doing that. And I think from the discussions that I've heard so far, maybe you're wondering too. But I wanted to start out just seeing, with the raise of hands, how many people know somebody right now who's incarcerated? Just about everybody. How many people know their current House representative? Wow, that's tremendous. How many people know their state senator? Wow, you guys got an A+. And the reason that is so important is because prisons are directly related to politics. And it might not seem so on the face of it, but because you're active, you're probably aware that our elected officials make the rules. They decide what the sentences are. They decide how long a mandatory might be. They decide what is a penalty and why people should be penalized, whether or not it makes sense. They are the body that does it. Our state General Assembly determines most of the criminal justice laws that impact people who are incarcerated in state prisons and county jails. Now, right now, throughout the country, John Legend has stood up saying enough. We can't keep incarcerating. President Obama has said enough. We can't keep incarcerating. The Koch brothers, huge money-making conglomerate, said, no, it's costing too much, enough. We keep finding world leaders, the Pope, saying enough. And yet in Pennsylvania, we're incarcerating nearly 100,000 individuals in state prisons, federal lockups, and county jails. And we're making rules, a few of them that are good, but a lot of them that are adding penalties, adding time, and adding costs. And Melanie and Charlotte did a great job in explaining what the realities of reentry are, what it really looks like, and what some of the issues are that are on the table right now, most of which are bad, but a couple that are good. So if we look at prisons and politics, and I think from this group, because you're so well informed, you're probably aware of Willie Horton, Reginald McFadden, two of the stars, and I don't say that in glowing terms, that made a sea change in how prisons work, and how prisons work with politics. So it's very easy for a politician to be tough on crime, to slam the door, to say this is what we need to keep safe, without looking at any of the other issues, whether or not it makes sense. And generally, an uninformed body will say, okay, that makes sense. I want to be safe. I don't want to have to worry about going outside. But it's not doing the trick. We have too many people incarcerated, too many collateral consequences, too many kids wondering where their parents are, and not enough supports and other programs that we need. But these sentences, these ideas, these provisions, these conditions are things that we as an electorate can weigh in on. And that's the beauty of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches and everything that you're doing, because your voice counts. What your church says counts. What your congregation says counts. In 1980 or so, there were 12,000 inmates in 8 prisons. Now, just in the state system, 50,000 inmates in 25 prisons, and 2 more almost ready to open the doors, except there have been huge problems, and it's going to take a little while. But that's all legislation. It's all budgets. Maybe not this budget, because it's still not finished, but it's all connected. So what we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about some of the bills, some of the measures that are currently before the General Assembly. And again, you know a lot more than perhaps I thought you did, so you might want to add to this discussion, and feel free to jump in if there's an issue that you want to mention. But one of the bills that we wanted to mention, and it was in your packet, is House Bill 1467. It's ban-the-box legislation. It was introduced by Representative Acosta. It's moving very slow. Frankly, it's not really moving. But the idea is we're going to take that question of an arrest record or felony record or ex-con or however it's raised on a job application and take it off. There are a number of counties in the Pennsylvania area that have actually done this, but we're looking at statewide legislation to make it the law of the land so that anybody in Pennsylvania, regardless of their criminal background, does not have to answer that question until the first interview. That legislation is not going to solve the job problem. It's not going to cut all the barriers on employment that people are finding it so difficult to get. But it is a step in the right direction, and it brings that topic to the fore. It forces, frankly, our elected officials to start thinking, oh wow, I never realized that. I never even thought about somebody trying to get a job if they're an ex-offender or a returning citizen, or what that might really mean, or how difficult it might be. It's a start to the full discussion of employment and how people can't stay on the outside if they don't have some kind of income or some kind of way to pay their bills. This legislation is important. It's important to start moving. It's important to have hearings. And it's built on ordinances in Philadelphia and Lancaster, Pittsburgh, Berks County, and I believe here in Dauphin County. From what I've heard, you're very, very close to getting it passed.
With support from our Chamber of Commerce.
Excellent. And that's kind of unusual because chambers don't necessarily always step up to the plate. So that could be a real good model in not only talking about the local, but in bringing it up to that state level. So that's huge. And our legislators need to hear that. For this bill, especially in the House Judiciary Committee, to push it forward. Is it the best bill in the world? Nope. Is it really powerful? Nope. But it's a start. And it's good legislation. 19 other states do something. Pennsylvania should do it too. A bill that we're not too fond of, and there's information in your packet, and we added a sample letter on the table, is what originally we called the restitution bill. But we've changed that to the account and wage garnishment bill. And that's House Bill 1089. That was put in by Representative Stevens, who's from Montgomery County, a rising star, very active in House Judiciary, and a little P.S., he's running for Attorney General.
He's a right-winger.
Mr. DeWeese, you could weigh in too. Took the words right out of my mouth.
The more we label them, the less conversation we can have.
Very good point, Jim. We shouldn't label anybody, whether it's returning citizens or us as individuals or even the right-wingers, even if we know that that's really what they are. But this bill, we called it restitution because what it really does is reach into inmate accounts and up how much the percentage is that would pay for restitution. But I think we made a mistake in looking at this legislation by calling it restitution. Because restitution really is important. And Melanie Snyder mentioned it before. It's paying back. It's showing good faith. It's repairing. I think restitution really does make sense. But not the process, not the way Representative Stevens and a lot of his supporters are going about this. I mean, they are basically going into inmates' accounts and grabbing money out. Grabbing money that comes from families for the most part, many of whom are struggling, many of whom are sending money into prison to help their loved one that maybe they're not using to buy a backpack for their child who's starting school. It's forcing families on the outside to really prioritize and maybe struggle, and that's where we think this is not fair. That's where we think this legislation is majorly flawed. So we renamed it to the garnishment bill. We're hoping that that does make a bigger impression. We think it's a huge problem, though, not only this piece of legislation, but there are at least 5 other bills that are grabbing money from current inmates. Now, generally, when you talk about people who are incarcerated, not across the board, but generally there's a strong connection between incarceration and poverty. And just as Melanie mentioned, when you tick off fines, when you tick off costs, when you tick off what someone was saying yesterday, an entrance fee into some of the county prisons, when you tick off room and board, when you tick off going to the doctor in the prison, when you tick off all these different things, what's left? Now, legislators a lot of times will say, well, I'm not paying for someone getting a TV. I'm not getting cable. I was a Marine. I lived 6 in a little space. I lived in a bunk. You know, if I did it, they should do it too. What's the big deal? But the conditions are very different. Imprisonment is a situation that's forced. Imprisonment is following the punishment. Imprisonment is not being in the Marines, and it's not being given a TV or cable just because it's something fun and nice to do. You can do a lot of educational things if you get a TV. You can pass the time, which is otherwise maddening. You can do things that are very productive. And face it, technology is the lay of the land now. If you don't have some connection to the outside world, you are so far behind when and if you come out, it's going to be really hard to catch up. TV is not the best way to do it, but at least it can help keep you current. But we don't talk about TVs when we talk about this bill. We talk more about people having to buy toothpaste and shampoo and underwear. So we have a sample letter that you might want to use if this is a piece of legislation that you would like to oppose also, and we hope you will. But your words are better. Your stories are better. What you hear from your congregations are much more important than what we have on that piece of paper. That's just to get you started. But hopefully you'll do it. It would mean a lot if more and more people weigh in. And then we can provide information on the other bills, which on a different piece of paper, we do have a listing of a dozen pieces of legislation that are pending before the General Assembly. And if there's time, we'll go through some of those too. But another bill that we wanted to highlight is expungement. Now, expungement is clearing your record. Clearing your record within a certain amount of time, certain conditions, certain kinds of offenses, misdemeanor, felony, whatever. But the legislature's been a little tricky on this issue too, because expungement now is no longer really in vogue. What we're looking at is limited access. It's kind of the cousin of expungement. It's not as strong. It's not saying, I'm going to take away that information. I'm taking off that information of your arrest, your conviction, whatever it might be. What it's saying is that prior information about your criminal record can only go to certain people, only certain agencies, only certain times under certain conditions. It's not too bad, because that really does help. You don't want all that information going all over, but it's just not as good. And for this particular piece of legislation, for the life of me, we can't quite figure out why that's happening. Because for this piece of legislation, and there are actually 7 expungement bills in some form or another pending, even the district attorney support it. And generally, they're one of the stronger opponents as a body on a lot of the legislation we look at. So if anyone has insight, please share.
Well, it's a question. What are the numbers for the bills that you want us to be?
Yes. So with expungement, there are a number of different versions, whether it's expungement, limited access. The bill that's moving the farthest, already passed the Senate, now it's on the House floor, is Senate Bill 166. It was introduced by Senator Greenleaf. It's good, but it was better. It was amended, and it's just a tiny bit weaker. But it's still okay. It's that limited access, and we'll take it. And the reason we'll take it is because it's already passed the Senate, it's on the House floor, and this could actually move. We could actually see this one signed off by the governor at some point, assuming, of course, they do solve the budget and things start moving again. Lots of assumptions. The garnishment bill that we were talking about is House Bill 1089. That one, right, that one we don't like, and then ban the box, which we do. But a lot of these pieces of legislation are things that are introduced quietly, things that are introduced quickly, and one of the best examples was a piece of legislation from last year that you might remember. It was called the Re-Victimization Act. It was a direct response to Mumia Abdul-Jamal giving a speech by tape at a college, by request. Legislators thought that was outrageous, that that could happen, that somebody convicted and sitting formerly on death row and now is a lifer should get that opportunity. So they basically put together some language very quickly and very poorly, thank goodness, that said, basically, anyone who's been connected with criminal justice should not have that opportunity to talk if it hurts someone who's been victimized. Very, very big, loose language. Very vague. And that was the beauty of it, at least for us and groups like the ACLU who sued, and we were a party to that suit. I'm raising that, though, because this legislation was done quickly. It was signed off right before Governor Corbett left. It was done boom, boom, boom for the politics. And that goes back to some of the motivation for some of these laws and rules and reasons for people introducing them. Often done quickly, in the scope of a quiet evening, amend it here, amend it there, do the Christmas tree, which is supposed to be illegal, but they do anyway. There are all kinds of gimmicks, all kinds of things, but...
I think battery must have gone.
But if the public stands up, if you stand up, If we had people saying no and people watching, then it can't happen. And that's why it's so important for you and your congregation and your communities and everybody to do that. And for the folks who are going tomorrow to the Capitol, that's spectacular. You're going to have FaceTime, hopefully with the legislator, but even if a staff aide, you can get the message across. Short and pithy is probably better, because nobody has a long attention span, and no offense, especially in the Capitol. They want it short, they want a bullet point, maybe 2, maybe 3 if you're pushing your luck, and that's it. But you get your face, you're a voter, and all of a sudden it's a different equation. But we want to see people who have been in the prison system do the same thing. We want their families to be able to have that opportunity as well. We need people to hit the road and really hold our elected officials accountable. We put them in office, or at least we let them go into office. We can be the ones getting them out. But we have seen some situations where there are all kinds of good issues pending. And that list of a dozen bills talks about children incarceration, parents incarcerated, which would meet needs that kids actually have, that would help straighten out some of the situations of the 120 or I think 200,000 children whose parents are incarcerated in the state. There's a bill that talks about faith-based organizations that the Pennsylvania Council of Churches might be interested in. There are some very, very good things that we can look at and push and work on. The ways we can do that, though, and Melanie brought up a slew of ideas on how we can work on that, are everything from reading groups within the church to knocking on doors to putting letters to the editor. But one thing that I wanted to mention as a real possibility, and I'd love to have more discussion on this later and to see if either the Council of Churches or your individual churches would be interested. And that's something that the Prison Society has been engaged in maybe 100 years ago, a little before my time. It was an issue, or an event rather, called Prison Sunday. And we had discussion from the pulpit with congregations to talk about criminal justice. It was up to the individual church to decide what that message was, but to bring everybody in to focus on issues of prisoners, prison, children, whatever the connection might be. And we all know prison is a microcosm of the world, so it's basically everything. But what we want to do this year is to kick it off again, make it ecumenical, make it interfaith, and call it Prison Sabbath, so we don't exclude groups who might not celebrate on a certain day. We want to do it in churches, but simultaneously have sessions, groups, discussions in the prisons. So we designate 1 week or one time period, maybe in the spring when we don't have to worry about snow or ice, to all talk about criminal justice, to have everybody on the same page. And in my real wild dreams, to even think that we could have somebody in the General Assembly stand up on the House floor or the Senate floor and talk about criminal justice issues too in their invocation or as they kick off the session. It's a way for people to come together and talk and have like-minded issues, even if just for a minute, and put everybody on the same page, to make it an issue across the state. But you can design it the way you want, you can emphasize the issues the way you want, and what's meaningful in your community. At this point, it's just an idea. It obviously needs a lot of fleshing out, but if you're interested, what I'm thinking is we would have an advisory committee across the state, we would put it together, try it small for who would want to do it, and then pick it up year after year. Make it an annual, make it something that people could weigh in on, and what Melanie had talked about, to connect. We need to connect the dots. We need to pull people in and do it in ways that's easy and something that people can take home with them and build on if you want, or just do that one moment. There are lots of different ideas, lots of different creative strategies that we could do, but the bottom line is your voice, your congregation's voice, the people that you work with, your families, as voters are a key political point. You're already active, but we need to add folks into that equation. We need to make these issues count, and the way to do that is to make our elected officials accountable. Thank you.
I just wanted to take a second and use the organizer's prerogative here to say that we already have a really good interfaith base here in Harrisburg, and perhaps we can serve as the pilot.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so let's talk.
Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm going to put this in here because I'm going to try to stay in one place. And I'm not usually very successful at that, but I'm
I
gonna
can move this if you need.
try. Okay, good. For those of you who don't know, and probably most of you don't, my name is Doug Walker, and I am the official title that I have is the National Coordinator for Criminal Justice Reform for the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church. And in that responsibility, actually, I'm here to talk to you about federal legislation. This is not going to work. I'm here to talk to you about some of the stuff that's been going on the federal level. But there are two things about that are true. One is that not much has really been going on the federal level. There has been a lot of talk, and there's been a lot of excitement, but the only thing that has actually happened, and there's some reason for excitement about it, but the only thing that has really actually happened is the recent bipartisan criminal justice reform bill that has come out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, that bill still has to go to the full Senate and be passed. There's also a companion bill being considered now in the House Judiciary Committee, and then that has to get through the committee and then through the House, and then they've got to kind of compromise and work on the two bills and get them together, come together on something that they can both agree on and pass, and then get to the president. So there's still a lot of real work to be done. And of course, in everything, the devil is in the details, right? So there are some good pieces and some challenging pieces. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a number or numbers of these bills?
I do not have numbers for these bills just yet. And I forget the name of the Senate bill, but Laura, do you have it? Okay.
I think it's called the Reform and Corrections Act of 2015.
Right.
I will get all of this information and send it out to everyone who's been registered, okay?
Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act.
Yeah. So that's the name of it right now. By the time it actually gets out, who knows what the name will be. And I think part of the issue is hopefully the Republicans will have decided who they want to be Speaker of the House, so that they can actually, kind of get this stuff done. And hopefully the new Speaker will decide that, this is something that he or she wants to bring to a vote. It won't be a she. We can hope.
Yeah, right.
So that's one of the things that's one of the things. The other thing is that my primary work is actually not on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. In fact, sometimes I wonder why I even rent an apartment in Washington, because my primary work actually is out in the field in the States. And so I spend a lot of time in places like Waterloo, Iowa, and Wichita, Kansas, and I'm going to be doing a whole tour of the state of Montana here next week. So So I spent a lot of time out in the States, Seattle, Spokane. So I spent a lot of time out there because the reality is all politics is local, right? And the majority of what's happening with our incarceration and criminal justice system, the majority of it is happening on the state and local level, right? I was looking at the details of this upcoming release of 6,000 federal prisoners. And as I looked at the details, that's about half, a little less than half of the folks who have been granted early release based on the new federal sentencing guidelines, particularly federal drug sentencing guidelines. It's about a little less than half of the folks who have been granted an early release. And as you look at the details, the numbers are actually, when you think, oh, this is a federal thing, so you're thinking, 6,000 people, but you look at the details and you see that, you're looking at like 300 people here, 200 there, another 35 here, 45 there. So the federal system, a lot of this stuff does not affect a large number of people because most of the folks who are in our jails and prisons are incarcerated on the state and local level. And so that's where a lot of my work happens. That's where I spend a lot of my time. And as you have seen here in Pennsylvania, it is slow going. It is slow going. I was in Waterloo on Monday, and I had an opportunity to share with the Waterloo City Council. They're considering a legislation. It's called Ban the Box, or it's commonly referred to as Ban the Box, but I prefer to refer to it as fair hiring opportunities, right? Fair hiring opportunities to give people an honest opportunity at employment. So I was there. One of the things that they're doing in Waterloo, not only are they looking at this for employment, but also for housing, so that folks who have prior convictions have a fair opportunity for housing as well. So that's one of the other things that they're considering in Waterloo. Similar things are happening around the country. Of course, here in Pennsylvania, you're working on that. And one of the things that is important to help folks to understand is that when folks say ban the box, what they're not saying is never ask the question at all. That's not what's being said. They're simply saying, let's ask the question at a different time in the process. Rather than asking the question right up front and using that as a filter for the circular file, wait until after you've had an opportunity to determine whether or not you even think that person is a viable candidate for that position. Even wait until you're ready to make a hiring decision, and then ask that question as a part of that process. And that way, people have a fair chance. People have a fair opportunity, right? Because really, right now, if you ask that question, you can always say, because, see, here's the thing. It is already against federal EEOC guidelines to automatically deny a person a job because they say, yes, I've been convicted of a felony, right? So it's already not legal to do that. But it's still happening. And it still happens because it's so hard to prove, right? Because at that point in the process, you can always say, well, we've already found someone more compatible, right? We found someone else who fits, what we're looking for. But if you wait until you're actually prepared to offer that person a job, until you've conditionally made an offer of employment, then it's harder to say, oh, we found somebody more compatible because you've already offered me the job. Right? And so unless there's something in my past that is directly, adversely related to the job for which I've been offered, then there's no reason for you to not go ahead on and hire me. Right? And so that's what we're talking about when we say ban the box. Right? So it's not just saying, don't ever ask, but it's simply saying, let's ask at a different point in the process that gives people more of an opportunity. I'll give you an example. In 2005, I returned to Florida where there was an active warrant for my arrest for felony drug possession. And when I returned, I turned myself into the public defender, who told me that we would get a new court case and that I should drive carefully until that court had come back. But in the new court case, what they did was they gave me what's called drug court. So it was a pretrial intervention program. In the meantime, I had applied for a job with a temporary agency. The temporary agency, the deal is they'll place you. You work at that company for 90 days, and after 90 days, if the company likes you, then the company will hire you away from the temporary agency. You become permanent. Well, when I went to apply for the job with the temporary agency, I told them, I said, listen, 7 years ago, I've been arrested here in Florida on felony drug possession. And so they said, well, if 7 years ago, that's fine. We got you covered. No problem. We can work with that. So I got placed with the company doing technical support for a prominent internet service provider. And actually, during my first 90 days, I got a call from Lisa Thomas Lawrence. I could help her with her computers from here on Channel 6 in Philly. But anyway, so the 90 days were up, and my supervisors all said, Doug, we love your work. You're great. We want you to go at the end of your shift. Don't even wait till tomorrow. At the end of your shift, go out to HR, fill out our application so that you can become permanent with the company. So under my shift, I went over to HR, filled out the application. On the application, it says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? No. Have you ever been involved in a pretrial intervention program? No. Have you ever had a traffic ticket? No. Have you ever been arrested? So, me being honest, I said, yes, I'm involved in a pretrial intervention program. Now, pretrial means I have not had a trial yet, which means I have not been proven innocent or guilty, which means I have not actually even entered a plea of innocent or guilty. So, in the United States, you have the presumption of innocence. So I said yes. And before I could return to work for my next shift, I got a call that said, don't come back. And so for the next 2 days, my supervisors, who actually were employees of the company, and the temporary agency that had a vested interest in making sure that they didn't have a record of referring people who wouldn't be hired by the company, for the next couple of days, they went to bat for me. And finally, after about 3 days, they called me in and said, come on in. And when I got in, they said, well, we always handle these things on a case-by-case basis. And I wanted the job, so I couldn't say what was on my mind at the moment. But it was only because people had gotten to know me. They had the opportunity. I had opportunity to talk to people, and they had opportunity to talk to me. And so having that opportunity then helped me to be able to get that job. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about ban the box. We're not talking about 90 days, but we are saying give that person an opportunity for you to even see who they are, see if you like them. Another story, real quick. I was managing a valet company that did valet for hotels in Nashville, Tennessee. young woman came to me and said, as a condition of my release, I just got out of prison, living in a halfway house, and as a condition of my release, in order to stay out, in order to not go back, in order to comply and not be in violation, I have to have a job. That's a condition of my release. And so, you know, having come from where I came from and having formerly been in jail myself and having, you know, a record and all of that, you know, my answer was right away, yes. I didn't even know what she could do. But, and so I said, you know, just be honest, put everything down. This was before my Florida experience. Be honest, write everything down, and, you know, I'll make sure I call the company and talk to them and kind of walk us through. So she wrote everything down. I called the vice president of the company. And I said, Gary, here's the situation. I have this young woman. She applied for this job. She's qualified. She can do it. Here's her situation. Said she has a felony on her record. Has nothing to do with the job, though. You know, it's not theft or not anything like that. His response to me was, Doug, if they have a felony, do not hire. No question about qualifications, no question about experience, simply if they have a felony, do not hire. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you all of this because all politics is local. All politics is local. And it was kind of, interesting when you were asking, you know, if we know our representatives, because I live in Washington, D.C., right? So we don't have any. One. So, well, we do have one non-voting member of Congress. But other than that, we have no representation. But we won't get into that conversation. But all politics is local, and so all of you affect your politicians on both the state and local and federal levels, right? And because all politics is local, you have the opportunity to make major changes. So we started out talking about this Senate bill that came out, that finally came out. Well, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee is the senior senator from the great state of Iowa, Mr. Charles Grassley. And back in March, Chairman Grassley simply said that criminal justice reform would not be a conversation for his committee. He simply said, and as a chairman, he could do that. He could say what will come up and what will not come up in committee. And back in March, he decided that criminal justice reform would not be a conversation in that committee this year. Well, some folks in my office said to me, Doug, who do we know in Iowa? And I said, well, we know a couple of pastors in Iowa. We know Pastor Abraham Funches of Waterloo, and we know Pastor Lee Schott, who, by the way, pastors a church called Women at the Well, which is a church that is on the inside of the Women's Correctional Facility in Mitchellville, Iowa. All of the parishioners, church leaders, and staff are insiders. And the only person who's actually from the outside, well, they have one leadership committee that is both insiders and outsiders. And the pastor is actually appointed by the bishop to serve that church. And so, well, we know a couple of folks in Iowa. And so we contacted them, and we asked them who they knew, and they knew some other folks, and then we also are part of the Interfaith Criminal Justice Coalition. And so some of the other groups in our coalition knew some folks in Iowa. And we began to get all of these folks together to have a conversation with their local politician, Senator Charles Grassley. And so what happened was there was a letter that was circulated and written, signed by 130 clergy, There was an op-ed done by 3 bishops in the state of Iowa. And eventually, and in addition to that, a group of pastors, actually led by Pastor Funches and Pastor Schott, actually sat down and had, well, I won't say sat down, but they had a conference call on the phone with Senator Grassley. And you know what happened? Senator Grassley decided that criminal justice reform might just be a conversation that they would have in his committee this year. And you know what happened when they had the conversation? That Senate bill that I just didn't know the number for. That Senate bill is a direct result of that work that was done by the people of the great state of Iowa. All politics is local. All politics is local. And so it is important that we work on a local level. Now, something that I want to emphasize. It's interesting that you mentioned the law about Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I grew up, by the way, in Frank Rizzo's Philadelphia. So I'm familiar with, the history of the Philadelphia Police Force and the community that Mumia Abu-Jamal comes from. And the political implications and ramifications of that relationship. But it's interesting that in Iowa, so last year, or earlier this year in April, we had a similar conference to what you're having here on a national level called Ecumenical Advocacy Days in Washington, D.C. And we brought folks from all over the country. And one of the workshops was led by Pastor Schott. And what she wanted to do was she wanted to actually have the voices of the women who were on the inside, because really, when you want subject matter experts, when you really want subject matter experts, PhDs are cool, and I'm trying to get one, But if you really want subject matter experts, then what you really need to do is talk to and listen to and follow people who are actually impacted by the policy that you're planning on putting in place, or that you want to, or think you want to design. So Pastor Schott wanted to have the women, have the voices of the women to be heard, and so she wanted to do some videos. And we said, that'd be fantastic, if we could actually, do the videos. But one of the challenges is that she had to get permission, and she wasn't sure she was going to be able to do it, because there's a law on the books in Iowa that says that people's faces and voices cannot be heard if the victims of their crimes will be impacted. Now, I'm older than I look. And I remember apartheid in South Africa. And I remember this thing called banning, where a person was banned. When a person was banned, their image could not be seen, their voice could not be heard, you could not quote them. In fact, it was illegal. The idea was we wanted to try, the goal of the government was to try to obliterate that person from memory and existence. And essentially what we do with our criminal justice system in the United States is we try to obliterate these people from our memories and existence. Laura and I were in Chicago in 2012, and she knows what's coming. And at the conference that we were at in Chicago, Michelle Alexander led a panel, and she started that panel by saying this. She said the core challenge to ending mass incarceration is dispelling the myth that some of us are not worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion. The core challenge to ending mass incarceration is dispelling the myth that some of us are not worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion. And the reason why that is so important in a setting like this, for a group like this, is because all politics is local. It starts at home. It starts at the local level. And you see, I like Michelle Alexander's definition of mass incarceration, and the reason why I like it is because a lot of times, most of the rhetoric, most of the conversation is talking about the prison population, the number of people in jail and the conditions they face in jail or in lockup. But Michelle Alexander defines mass incarceration this way, and I like it. She says that mass incarceration is a tightly networked collection of laws, policies, traditions, and institutions that work collectively to keep a group of people in a permanent underclass status defined largely by race. The reason why I like that is because it goes beyond just the numbers of people who are in jail. See, here's the thing. If all we concentrate is not having so many people in jail and not having so many prisons, then we don't deal with all of this network of tightly networked collections of laws and policies, traditions. Because, you see, denying someone a job because they have a criminal record is not a law. In fact, it's against the law. But it's a policy and a tradition. Right? See, it's something that we just do and accept. And so, when we understand that everyone has value, everyone is worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion, then we don't run the danger of doing what Howard Thurman said in The Luminous Darkness. When he talked about the Jim Crow of his day, he said, listen, the problem is an attitude of mind and the mood of the human spirit. And if we don't address that, then what we get rid of will just show up again in a more insidious and more difficult form. And my brothers and my sisters, I would argue today that what has happened is that we have not changed significantly the myth that there are some people who are not worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion. And our current problem of mass incarceration, not just the number of people who are in prison, but the problem of this tightly networked collection of laws, policies, traditions, and institutions that work collectively to keep a group of people in a permanent underclass status, that is a byproduct. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's what we do. We're the church. church. We are people of faith and goodwill. That's our wheelhouse. And so, because all politics is local, politicians at least say they go to church. Right? I mean, they may not go to, they may not go to a Christian church. It may be a synagogue, or it may be the mosque, or what have you. But politicians, by and large, very few claim no faith whatsoever, and all claim to be people of goodwill. So that's our wheelhouse. And so we should have no problem not only lobbying on Capitol Hill, but teaching and preaching and working this stuff in our congregations and in our communities. So that even if the people who purport to represent us do not behave and legislate from a position of understanding all people to be worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion, the communities that they represent will rise up and say all people are worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion. And when the communities rise up, then people have to listen.
Amen.
My uncle is he's somewhat of a lobbyist, and he works with taxi cabs and taxi cab commission. So he's in Harrisburg and used to work with POC, and now his big deal is with the parking authority in Philadelphia, because they've taken over stuff and kind of gone crazy. But his big thing, every time we talk, he said, Doug, they got to vote, they got to vote, they got to vote. People got to register and vote. Yes, we do absolutely have to register and vote. But after we register and vote, after the election is over, we cannot sit still. And this is what I continue to kind of encourage. Yes, we got to vote. But after the election is over, we still have to agitate. We still have to move. And we still have to work. Because we not only have to elect folks, but then we got to make them do the right thing. And it's up to us, people of faith and goodwill, to make that happen. Thanks for letting me share.
We have some time for questions, so great. Lots of questions. I think I saw you first, so.
Thank you. I want to talk about what you said about that we can't say that some people are not worthy of compassion and care and goodwill or concern. I've had a number of conversations with people in my church, and my particular church is claims to be concerned and acts concerned about poor people in Philadelphia who live immediately around our church particularly. And these people say to me, there are all these people not in prison who don't have jobs, don't have food, don't get education, etc. So if I'm going to make a decision to work on behalf of a group of people, why should I choose people who, in addition to not having all those things, have committed crimes or probably have committed crimes? And I don't really have a good answer for that. It somehow doesn't sound right to me, but I don't have a good answer.
So, it's interesting when we hear folks who are in the church to say this kind of thing about folks who have criminal records. Because most of us, particularly in the church, and I'll be honest, that's my hermeneutic, right? That's where I come from. So I come from the church. So when I talk, I will talk from my experience, but I understand that my experience is in no way normative, right? So I mean, it doesn't mean there are other folks besides church folk, but I just find it interesting because if we really didn't have any concern or felt like, we can't really be bothered with folk with criminal records, we'd have to drastically change the Bible.
Yeah.
That says it all.
What Dean Trulier talked about.
Right? He tells that story often about one of his students, right? And how he had to change the whole book, right? Half of the stuff we say, we have to change, right?
I'm not saying
but-
that these people claim that we shouldn't be helping people in prison or that they're bad people or anything like that. But that given the limited amount of energy, why shouldn't we focus on people who aren't in prison, who have all the same problems, but haven't been in prison? Because that can chew up every bit of energy and time that we have. All the people, because there is not enough for all the people who aren't in prison. It's not about saying that people in prison are not worthy.
Okay, so that's the first thing. And once you've gotten over that hurdle, right, and understand that everyone is worthy, that's a great start. The other thing is, it's not an either or, but a both and, right? Because all of that is needed. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with someone, with working with folks who are oppressed by a poor educational system, who are oppressed by poverty, who are dealing with all those things that we see in those communities, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, if that had happened well, for the majority of people who are in prison, they wouldn't be in prison. So it's a great thing to do that, but it's not an either or, and I think we kind of set ourselves up by looking at it as a dichotomy, but it's a both and. Speak to that.
Yeah, just to add in, 95% of those who are incarcerated are coming back out. So these are individuals who are our neighbors, our friends, our relatives, our cousins. They're going to be storekeepers. They're going to be people we work with. They are just people. And we need to deal with them and help them just like we would anybody else. But the other piece is the discussion of collateral consequences that Melanie talked about. There are all these other circles that are impacted by incarceration. So maybe a 5-year-old child whose mom is incarcerated isn't directly the person incarcerated, but she might be affected too. And that might affect her life as she grows up. So that effect, that impact, in the end, impacts all of us. And I think it's these social circles that we really have to start looking at when we connect those dots and when we talk to people about who are we talking about.
My response to that, people in church, is say, let's make the people out there who have not committed crimes the priority. And if we have time and money and jail authority, then we'll do something for people behind bars. My response is this: go to those people out there who are poor and needy and say, we want to help you. We want to help your community. But we've got a problem. We're also concerned about men and women in prison. What do you think? How much of our time and energy should we spend helping you or people in prison? And you would say, that's my baby. Help him.
I am looking at this a little differently. I am looking at prevention. I want to stop that pipeline that has people coming into the system in the first place. One of the ways to do that is to make sure that there are opportunities for young people of color out in the community. That means that all you wonderful folks who have these great, big, huge churches that have HVAC systems, that hire plumbers, that hire carpenters, that hire refrigeration people, who buy food, who have buses, make sure that all those people who service your institution are hiring people that look like me, a diverse workforce. If you put that out there like that, and your congregation begins to see it work, guess what? People in your congregation will begin to do the same thing. It's real easy when you go in to have your car serviced to take a look in the back and see who's there. No women. Jump up and down, yell and scream. Okay? No people of color. Jump up and down, yell and scream. And when they come at you and say, well, we can't find anybody like that, then you tell them to go to the junior high schools and tell, during career day and say, this is what it takes. This is how much money you can make doing this. You can make enough money to have all the things that you want. And you know what? It's good for business because when their parents decide to buy a car the next time, they're going to remember that someone from your organization took the time to come in. Thank you.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, kind of on the prevention side, is a thing called participatory defense. It's a fancy new term, but basically all it really is folks from a person's community who may be who's facing trial. They actually take part in that defense, right? So the community actually takes part in that person's defense by being present in court, by providing testimony, character witnesses, by just being a part of that defense, and the defense attorney can help as well to kind of guide you through what you can do. But that's one of the other ways that you can kind of get in on the prevention side, right, on the front end, because that makes a big difference for not only the judge, but for the people who have the real authority, the prosecutors, who actually can determine what their charge is going to be and what the sentence will be based on the charge that they decide. So that can have a big impact, and that's another way of being able to help, actually on the front side.
My question is how we can educate our churches about the people that are on the inside now, why they're there, what caused them to commit that crime, what caused them to be incarcerated. And rather than say we don't want to help them, they're already in there, let's help the ones that aren't. But if we learn from the ones that are, we can find out how to prevent the rest of them from becoming incarcerated, who can't find jobs or support. So that's the big challenge for me, myself, and for us to educate our churches, to help them look and get to know people on the inside, why they're there, and hopefully accept them and begin to look at the big problem that we need to help everyone.
Thank you very much. I want to work off the theme that my brother here established in terms of economics. God love you all, but we're not talking about money in a man's pocket. And I think that that's a crucial element. And self-help and mutual support is absolutely important. And it's tough to lift that up to growth. I'm a Quaker, and I've been volunteering at Fair Hill Burial Ground, which is a tent in Indiana, and it's a burial. It has some rather impressive statistics on the opposite side of positive. And I cannot convince people of goodwill, and you know Quakers are basically people of goodwill, although Lucretia Mott was on the outside and she raised hell about slavery, etc. But I can't convince these people to get folks from the neighborhood to mow the grass and to maintain the place. And it probably is the sum of about $50,000, maybe $60,000 a year. And it would have an impact in that neighborhood. But and I reflect back on us in the fact that we don't place the value of a buck. And I don't. It's easy to say, but I think I can.
So while the mic is moving, one of the things that I just wanted to point out is one, that money is important. So here's the thing: none of it none of it's exclusive, right? So there's no one thing that fixes it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, yep, we need money. We also need relationships. We also need supports. So all of those things are important. This issue and this problem that we have is so pervasive and interwoven and complex in so many different areas, from economics to education to health, mental health. It is, it is so complex that there's no one thing. So, so money is an issue, as well as relationships are an issue. But it's all, and it's an issue when you have, no schools or failing schools or poorly funded schools in your community and neighborhood. So, no one thing exclusive of other things is actually going to, is a panacea that's going to solve everything, right? But you kind of need all of that. And that kind of gets to what we were talking about, or what was brought up about, why folks are in prison, right? So when I did my undergrad work, one of the things that we did was we actually had a class on the inside. That was a requirement. We had to take a class on the inside. Very similar to the Inside Out program that was actually started here in Pennsylvania. Very similar to that. But one of the things that we never did ask our classmates who worked with us side by side was, why are you here? Right? What did you do? We never asked that question. Right? Because we really understood that it didn't matter what they did. There's so much stuff that's going on. There's so many systemic issues and factors that contribute and that create the situation that causes people to be incarcerated. Where's my friend? I think he left. Oh, there he is in the back. So 4 years ago, when I was a seminary student at Wesley, and one of my colleagues decided that we should have a prison ministry in our urban ministry program, Dr. Smith told our group, don't just go into the prison, create a program to go into prison and have a service and then come out. You need to look at the systemic issues, right? You need to look at what's causing people, like you said there, right? What causes people to go into prison, right? What's happening in their communities and in their world that creates that? And so that's what we started to look at, and that's what we have to work on, right? Is looking at these systemic issues, and so we can see that, right? We can see that when the budget is cut for education, right? We can see that when healthcare funds are withheld, right? We can see the kinds of things that are going to contribute to the prison population, right? So that's kind of what we can do.
I just want to throw in quickly, the other side of the economics is kind of ironic. And I'm just going to pose this and see what you think. But I think it's actually very good that we're spending so much on criminal justice. And the reason I'm saying that is because we are putting billions and billions of dollars into something that we can't account for. It doesn't really show results. And all of a sudden, our decision makers are starting to think, whoa, that is a lot of money, and maybe I better use it for something else. Maybe so many people incarcerated doesn't make sense, and maybe using all the money for criminal justice instead of for senior citizens, for education, for transportation, for our infrastructure. I think that, above everything, is forcing the discussion in our states, in our locals, in the federal system, and that money in the pocket that all of a sudden our elected officials are not finding is what's going to drive this issue even further and end up going in the right direction that we might think, even if the reason's wrong.
I'm grateful for your cheat sheet on the legislation before our representatives and senators. And in setting up my appointments on Monday, there was a genuine interest in what we learned here, what we addressed here, and to speak to that which is on their agenda. And I want a little more help in going into our appointments on Monday in case they ask us, do you have any comments on any of the legislation we're going to have to make decisions about this year? Can you spend just a few brief comments on pluses and minuses on some of these pieces before the legislature to know if we were asked that, how we could not appear too dumb?
And time-wise, is this okay, or?
Yeah, I think we'll do that, and then one more question, and yeah.
And
Lunch is at 12:15, so we've got about 5 more minutes according to my watch.
Okay, and you're talking about going
Yes,
through
I
the
am.
list of a dozen or so?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's hit it from the top. And anyone else can weigh, sorry. Sure. Anyone else can weigh in too. But starting at the top, House Bill 123, absolute negative. This is looking at not returning people's cash bail if they don't move on in the system. I mean, I think that says it all. I think there's a presumption that you would get that money back, and that's just another big slap in the face, as well as I'm not totally sure it's legal. House Bill 615, it's another expungement bill. It's good. It focuses on low-level misdemeanors, lower kinds of crimes, but it was introduced by Representative Tom Caltagirone, and maybe Mr. DeWeese would have a better idea, but I really don't think this bill is going to move. I think the focus for expungement is Senator Greenleaf's bill, Senate Bill 166. House Bill 758 is another bill that talks about wage attachment. And this is a bill that Community Legal Services is incredibly concerned about. This really looks at fines and costs and makes it very, very difficult for people coming out being able to reestablish their lives. They have cases and they point out individuals that owe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 when they walk out of the prison door. I mean, that's an impossible situation when you start, and there's just no way out. It's demoralizing, it's hopeless, you know, everything that goes into that. It just doesn't make any sense. And again, many individuals who are incarcerated are poor. They don't start out with a lot of money. They're not going to build up money while they're inside.
I have a question, though. If you're meeting with a senator and this is already passed, do you avoid talking about it, or what? It's passed the House. Oh, it's passed the House.
Yeah.
If I meet with my representative and it's already passed,
Say thanks.
Exactly. You can acknowledge them for what they've done on it. You might just want to engage them in conversation because there are other bills that talk about taking money. And I think that's really the essence of it. But for this particular bill, if you're meeting with a representative from the House, it's already been acted on.
Right.
One thing, though, that could happen, but that's where it gets really complicated and way beyond my scope, is if a legislator sees that his or her bill might not move for whatever reason in the next chamber, like in the Senate, they might try to amend it into something else. So that issue could still come up at another point in another bill. And we've been surprised many times when all of a sudden there is an amendment talking about something else that pops up. And a very good example of that is years and years and years ago, Representative DeWeese was still a lowly chairperson of House Judiciary. We worked on earn time, which originally was called good time. But no legislators wanted to give inmates a good time. So earn time, you had to earn it. That wasn't too good, so we talked about merit time, because you had to really earn it. That went out the door, and it was called triple RI, risk recidivism incentive, whatever, which nobody really understood and really doesn't work now anyway. But the point of this was, we tried getting that legislation amended into other things, and it almost worked. We got close. But then many of the legislators said, well, this doesn't relate, and we can't add it in. But it does happen that these things do get added in when you least expect it. So the bottom line is, just be on top of it, be aware, because you never know, it might come up.
There's a 50% or more chance that if it passes one chamber and goes to the other, it's going to come back on House amendments or Senate amendments.
Good point. Very good.
So it would be worth to say, would you consider a point of view here?
Yes, yes. And, you want to mark it down, because you can be back and check in with that individual and check that vote. We talked about 1089, and we talked about 1467. So are those good? Are those okay? With the fact sheets and all? Okay. Senate Bill 54. I don't have a lot of information on this. We put it on the list because it establishes the Pennsylvania Office for Faith-Based and Nonprofit Community Organizations. And I thought that that might be something that the Council of Churches either is looking at or would want to look at. So Sandy, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in.
I have not looked at this point, so I will.
Can I weigh in on it? Because it sort of is linked to my question or comment. I was told I should speak now because we're going to end soon. So I think in working with the faith community, I think one of the conversations is going back to our brother Douglas's comment about these issues being systemic. Our tendency as a faith community is that we tend to, like other systems, we actually don't take a systemic approach. We work in silos. And I think even based on the conversation, some of the questions that come up, that's what comes to mind. That's what comes to my mind. And so, as Dr. Fred Smith has been teaching for years about using the public health and faith model of bringing about systemic change. And so, one of the questions that we've been asking for about the past 4 or 6 months is, when will we begin to examine the intersection between public health and faith and public policy?
That is a good question.
One of the things one of the things that's kind of related to that, because what they did, one of the things that they did with public health was to look at the social determinants of health, right? In other words, let's flip it from looking at what causes people to be sick, but what causes people to be healthy. And I'm just wondering if we might not benefit from that same kind of thing in the criminal justice realm and flip it, right? And talk about public safety, right? What leads to public safety? And go from that angle, right? And begin to frame the conversation from the aspect of not criminal justice reform, but public safety reform. What can we do to increase public safety?
Right. And Dr. Gunderson, who was Gray's colleague, talks about it. Well, they asked the question, what are the leading causes of life?
That could also tie in with all kinds of issues of trauma
Right.
and everything on the public health side. We know a lot more about the brain and how it works. We know a lot about what children can and cannot do and have the capacity to do, so
Right.
that whole public health
all
piece
tied
is
in.
important. I also just spoke to someone recently from the National Epilepsy Foundation, and an area I never even thought about is people who are in the system who have epilepsy, who might be interpreted by correctional officers that, well, they're just not listening to me and therefore I'm going to write them up. And, you know, maybe they're having an epileptic seizure, maybe they're having a condition. Just another area that we really need to explore and think about before we just say someone's acting out or whatever.
I just have a really quick comment to underscore the point, particularly around public safety, and that is an emphasis. So through the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, one of our areas of work is direct discussion with heads of state departments of correction. And the conversation, when it shifts to one of public safety, it frees up an enormous space for us to talk about changing practice, implementing humane alternatives. So just wanted to underscore the enormous potential within our criminal justice work when we shift to a public safety frame as we're looking at this.
And we really do need to wrap up now. I want to give people a break before we have lunch. And one thing, just one brief thing I wanted to add. We're going to be meeting later this afternoon after the breakouts to talk about tomorrow. We have a whole list of legislation, but it would be a mistake for us to try to hit every single thing. We need to be focused, I think, on a couple of things which we're trying to do. We are not going to be effective if we try to go through a laundry list of things. I think that's something that we, you know, it's good to learn about all of these, and I'll plan on sharing more of that later. But I think we need to be focused tomorrow. So.
You got to focus on Brother Todd Stevens. I'm serious. Every church in his district, he's going to run for Attorney General. He'll probably be the next Attorney General of 12 million people. Apropos of what Doug said, it's all local. Go after that nice gentleman. I won't call him any names, although I wrote him from prison again and again, and he never wrote back, and I was a colleague for years. So my angst is palpable. And I'm not going to go visit yet. I'll go visit someday when I calm down. Anyway, God bless America. You need to forgive the metaphor. You need a carbine rather than a shotgun. You got to go after at least that bill. That bill is insidious. I just got out. I know what those kids get every week, 19 cents an hour. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible.
And we are going. That is one of the bills.
Thank you.
That is one of the bills.
And we can talk at lunch if anyone's interested about these other bills, like the merger bill or children incarcerated parents or whatever. So thank you very much.
If your church doesn't want to help people in prison, help children of incarcerated parents, and they are not yet in prison, but if you don't help them, they're headed there.
Just a quick thing before you all disappear from here, before we start, and I know you may want to take a break before we start lunch. The bookstore, Hearts and Minds Books, they're going to be open through lunch. I encourage you to get up there if you're looking for something before. They'll be packing up after lunch and when the breakout sessions start. So please make your trip up to Hearts and Minds and support what they're doing, because they're doing a tremendous ministry, I would say. So thank you.
You know, I may not have heard it right. I've been trying to think of what it would be. I mean, the idea that somebody would get charged and not.
What's right after? Do we go to the breakout?
There's breakout.